Hello, story lovers and storytellers, and welcome to Once Upon a Storytime, the podcast for all your storytelling needs. I am, as always, your wonderful host, Sarah McGilvray, and
Andreas is with you today. We are recording this together, physically on location.
Yay!
This is our first top 5 episode of this podcast.
Yep.
And we are going to talk about something that we both have discovered we have a passion for when it comes to
Adventure games. We both like adventure games. Now, the interesting thing is, Andreas, when it comes to adventure games, is retro, whereas I tend to be more geared towards modern stuff. So I think we complement each other quite well. Just to clarify, I know we did a top 3 of our favourite genres, but that was with me and Zach, and I don't count it. Well, not really. Yes. And it's my first top 5 with Andreas.
Yeah.
So.
And I think also we should try to discuss some of the storytelling mechanics in a adventure-driven game.
I think this is a very good idea. So, shall we get into the list?
Yeah. Place 5.
Number 5. Message Quest. Message Quest is a lovely little game where you basically are a person playing the game, and it does have some fourth wall breaking, which is fun. And basically you are encouraging someone to send a message to somebody else. I know that sounds really basic, but there's more to the story than meets the eye. We are posting all the links to the games that we are mentioning in the description below.
If they are available, we have certain games that one game on my list has not been re-released on
GOG.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you have to basically do an abandonware download and play it in ScumVM. But ScumVM is a really handy system. It's very, very hassle-free.
That's good.
And an open source project, which is always good. Yes.
So the beauty of Message Quest is that this is more about the art style than anything. It is done as basically it looks like a stained glass mirror. Or a stained glass. All the bits that you have are in stained glass, and it's a really cool aesthetic, and I really, really like it because of that as well. The main protagonist starts off as this boring, lazy, good. In quotation marks, good for nothing person who basically lies asleep all the time and doesn't really pay attention in the lessons that he's supposed to be going to. And the reason that he's been sent is because he's the last of the messengers. And yeah, so that's actually quite. I find that. It's quite an interesting story. There's also the fact that you have to kind of encourage him to do stuff by dragging him across the screen with the mouse, which is just hilarious.
Yeah.
And the story itself, whilst incredibly simple, has, in my opinion, quite a bit of depth to it, because there's a little bit of a mystery involved. Because your main character he can't quite remember how he got to where he is, but it's definitely worth checking out, and I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, and on my number 5 is an old LucasArts game from 1990.
You mean 1990, sweetheart?
Yeah, 1990. based loosely on the Tchaikovsky Swan Lake,
Okay.
which is about a cult-like society of weavers.
Okay.
And you have a magic rod, and it uses a C major scale for different spells and stuff.
Which is quite cool.
I even have written a university paper on this game, so
Yeah.
it's
There is one thing you haven't mentioned.
yeah.
What's the name of it?
Loom, because it's based off a loom.
Yes.
It is quite deep and quite mystical, I would say. Basically, are the chosen one, and yeah.
Yeah.
But as always with LucasArts, if you get the boxed art copy, it contains a 30-minute cassette with the entire backstory.
Wow. That's quite a feat. I mean, LucasArts was always one of those. Yeah.
Yeah, and they were like before their time with breaking the fourth wall and
all that kind of stuff.
Fun stuff. They even made the Indiana Jones games.
Nice.
And cool. Some other stuff. But the box art version is marvelous, as all these adventure game boxes are.
Yes.
Because generally they contain quite much information. For some later games in this episode that we will discuss require you to have the manual to play them.
Yes.
Because they contain information you need in game.
Yes.
Always interesting. But it was the way of doing stuff when you had 1.44 megabyte to deal with. So
yes.
It was a lot more forked into package design in those days.
Whereas nowadays it tends to be more just
download.
Yeah, in some ways.
And I have a boxed art copy of one of these games that are on our lists, mainly because I replied to hey, I want to give away a lot of big box art PC games.
Nice.
And I actually found another one from a publisher which we will discuss later on, that I will bring up briefly.
Yeah.
So let's continue on to number 4.
My number 4 is a rather fun little game set in the land of Oz called Emerald City Confidential. There is possibly a slight amount of rip-off of other I can't remember if the end, LA Confidential, I think, maybe. Basically, you play as Petra, who is a citizen of Oz called an Ozian, and it all starts when she is visited by a young lady called Dee. 3 guesses as to who Dee is in this. This is set somewhere between there's a few there's a number of characters in there that appear in the books. For example, you have the Wizard of Oz, you have Woot the Wanderer, you have the Tin Man, you have the Scarecrow, you have Queen Ozma, and a number of if you want to go and check out the lore of all of the books, go look on Wikipedia. It's all on there. But there's a lot of different people that you can find, and it's and the reason I like it is because, again, there is a certain amount of mystery involved, but also you're collecting buttons, you're trying to work out this mystery. You get to fight against Mombi. You get to, and with the wizard as your coach, which is awesome. And all of these different people that you find in the Wizard of Oz books, but at the same time, you've got you've got a number of different characters again from the books, and the story itself works out quite well. There's also the fact that the characters in this are all grown up and adult, whereas in the original books, none of the characters ever grow up because it's Oz, and Oz keeps people young. And I find it quite interesting the way that stuff happens, and the art style again is really, really lovely. Go and check it out if you get the chance. I think it's available on Steam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I checked this morning, €8.99.
Okay.
So quite low priced.
It's a good price. Most of the ones on my list will generally be a reasonably good price. Anyway.
My number 4 is a real legendary. This is like one of the genre-defining game series. It went on. It got a new game between 1984 and 1998, developed by the so ever popular Roberta Williams.
And the name of the game?
King's Quest.
Why am I not surprised? Go ahead.
Well, it's another of these Sierra Online adventure games. They were really defining at the time. And King's Quest, Space Quest, we're coming down to another of these ones. But the interesting thing is the way of working with story and their adaptation of story into game, despite having a very primitive graphic setup. You have a very good story-driven basis for it, which makes it a pioneer game. These are sold in collection bundles, so you can get for £8, you can get the first 3 games, and for £8, the second round of games.
Nice.
And we will also come to Mr. Al Lowe later in this show.
Nice.
And he's been involved in King's Quest and whatever.
Yes.
But what you have to think of with King's Quest is and the Quest series of games that comes from Sierra is that they are quite procedural.
Yes.
You have to do stuff in correct order.
Yeah.
You must save, and save.
Yes.
Luckily, these games are quite easy to revive on a modern PC due to the SCI engine that they use, which is compatible with ScumVM, which we have already talked about in this episode, which is basically a way that you can play these games on a modern computer and get the full-fledged experience.
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
And what is also to be said about Roberta Williams is that she developed one of the first FMV games there was.
Nice.
One of the most famous late 90s horror games.
Called?
Phantasmagoria.
Which I have never played and probably never will play. I've seen, if you ever watch Pushing Up Roses, she does a review on it, and it's quite
dark.
It's quite graphic and dark, and go.
Yeah.
If you want to go check it out, go check it out, but it's not my cup of tea.
Definitely not mine either, but it's good to mention that as
definitely.
This is what made her able to do Phantasmagoria.
Yes.
And that the Sierra company was so prominent in this genre as well. They were laying the foundation for games like Emerald City Confidential.
Yes.
Yeah. So
okay. Number 3. Now, I was originally going to go for something else, but I've swapped. So I've swapped the one that I was originally going to do for another one. The one that I was originally going to do will end up in the honourable mentions because the other one was in the honourable mentions. If you followed that, well done. I'm very impressed. So my number 3 is the Room series. Now, the Room is the series called The Room is rather interesting. It's one of these kind of pieced together. It's definitely a puzzle game. It's got quite. It's available on Steam. There are 3 games in the entire series. The third one has multiple endings. I don't know if they're going to do a 4th. It would be fun if they did, but yeah. And the first one, you've been invited to a house, and you go inside. You start off inside. You find a puzzle box. You kind of go. You solve all these different puzzles, but in the meantime, you're piecing together the lore by letters that you find within the game. The game. It's also fun to try and do it without any hints because some of the puzzles aren't always the most logical, but you figure it out eventually. You also have a special eyepiece that allows you to see things that you can't normally see, and the puzzles themselves are really cool and fun and intricate, and it's beautifully designed, and I seem to be saying that for every single game I play. Which is kind of fun, but also a bit ridiculous. Yeah. So it's your job to try and figure out what the history of it all is, and discover this thing called incidentally, spoilers, the null element, and you go through each different game, learning more and more and more about this, and eventually you come to you find out a lot more about all of the people that have come across this element, and especially in the second game and the third game, you end up in this place called Ravensholm, and you have to try and solve all the puzzles there. And the first ending, basically, you end up in a loop because the guy tricks you, which is kind of annoying, but you manage to get 3 different endings after that, which is always fun, and it's really worth checking the entire series out. It's a beautifully crafted game. There is a certain amount. It does say that it's more creepy, and there is a certain kind of not quite jump scare factor, but similar to jump scare factor that can make you go obviously because it's I'd be jump scare. There's small things like skulls and stuff, which aren't the nicest thing, but the game itself is worth playing, I think.
Yeah, and now we come to my number 3. Another Sierra game. As you might notice, I'm a fanboy.
I've noticed.
Yeah. And I will talk about the Police Quest series.
Okay.
It's a graphical adventure. It was originally developed by an unretired police officer.
Yeah.
But, here comes the big but. It referred so much to police procedure that it was basically impossible for another one to play it. You can die of such a simple thing of checking the ring pressure on the tires before you go out to patrol.
Yeah.
You crash the car.
Yep.
You're dead.
Yes.
Which is a typical thing for these games from Sierra. They require a meticulous amount of detail.
Yes.
But it also feels good to release the inner cop inside you.
Yeah, definitely.
And to hunt this drug lord. And to not spoil too much of the third game, there are a series of ritual murders as well.
Ooh, okay.
But you are to solve these murders and get the brain behind them. So it's a very interesting game series. You go to car crashes, catching speeding cars,
Gee, that sounds
booking in inmates at the prison.
Huh. That must be quite fun.
This game has a very clever copyright system in that manner. That you have to have the manual
Yes.
for these codes.
Yes.
Which you get when you buy it with GOG.
Nice.
So definitely a buy on GOG rather than Steam. Steam are not so good with extra material at all times. So
Yes.
Definitely a recommendation. And it's something quite satisfactional about playing a police,
Yes.
hunting criminals. So
That's cool.
yeah. Number 2 for you, Sarah.
Number 2 for me, you might notice that I tend to like series. Excuse me. My number 2 spot is the Phantasmat series. Now, Phantasmat is available from Big Fish Games. It started out as being done by I think ERS, I'm not sure, and got taken over by a company called iPix, which is EIPIX, who do a lot of different kind of who do a lot of different point and click games.
It's not the classic summer games developer we are talking about.
No.
Just for the sake of information to our listeners.
Yes. Good points. Yeah. It's point and click, hidden object, puzzle adventure. So you have a lot of hidden object puzzles, and that can be great. And it can also be a pain, especially when you're like me and like trying to get as many achievements as possible, which means that you're going through every single thing that you can, and then you make a mistake and you press the hint button and you lose one of your achievements, and it's like no.
Yeah.
And there are collectibles that you can collect. So the first one, to give an example, your car ends up being crashed because I think it's something like you see spirits in front, like in the front.
A bit like Shazam. The first boy in Shazam.
Yes, but in this you don't end up crashing the car because you suddenly get transported to a different place. You crash the car because some spirits suddenly appear in front of the car and start kind of saying, help us. And, things go weird, yes. Things go weird from that point onwards. And you end up in this town, end up staying at this hotel place, and discover that, spoilers, you discover that the three people, at least the 3 or 4 people who are there, who are permanent residents, are ghosts. And you have to try and release them from their torment and so forth. But you also get to go into a flooded town underneath all the underneath the water into the flooded town, which is quite fun.
Yeah.
You find, but the story itself is finding out what the story itself is actually finding out the 3 different stories of the people in this town. iPix took it over after about 3 or 4 games, I think. And they kind of revamped the series to a certain extent because you couldn't kind of keep with the same story or like the same thing of you end up in a town, you're trying to escape from it, and you've also got these ghosts that you need to get rid of. Instead, it's gone more towards you have to rescue these people or something. Most of them are still ghosts, but you're still very much human, which is fun. But some of the later games in the series can be quite interesting. I think there's one where there's this kid who got stuck in a well because it's definitely on the darker side, and the graphics definitely resemble that.
Yeah.
But it's very much about being patient and about looking for clues and picking up all the little hints as to what's going on. And yeah, it's definitely an interesting story.
Yeah.
Anyway,
my number 2 is Dr. Brain series.
Okay.
A shout out to Lazy Game Reviews on YouTube. You are doing he's doing April as Edutainment Month.
Nice, that's cool.
And this falls clearly into this category. It's a series of games about the genius hidden.
Okay.
And you're in the first game, you're at his castle. So it's basically getting deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into his castle.
Nice.
The second game, you are on his island trying to find the hidden battery.
Okay.
And in the third game, he's completely lost his memory. So you are repairing his mind, basically.
Oh, fun.
Through a different number of tasks, including music, puzzling, logic, robot programming.
Yes.
Various things. A really great series that really tickles your brain at times, but it contains a lot of fun. And as always with these Sierra games, they play cameo roles in each other's games. So sometimes you can find cameos.
That's always fun.
Like a game we will talk about later, Leisure Suit Larry. You will find Larry in certain games.
Yes.
Showing up in cameo. Just like the DuPonts from Tintin show up in an Asterix album.
Nice. That is cool.
It's a really fun series of games that though takes their time and patience, as with all Sierra games, as they are procedural.
Yes.
But they're very intelligent in the way they are built up.
Nice.
It's a very friendly game. It's cool. Great fun.
Now, before we go on to our number one picks, we have some honourable mentions.
Yes.
So, shall I start?
Yeah.
Okay. My honourable mentions are Zenge, Zenge and Epistory Typing Chronicles. Now, Zenge is a lovely, very peaceful, very melodic game. You have to try and put bits into you have different mechanics that come up during the game, and you have to try and put these shapes together, and eventually it creates a picture. And the story is told through the pictures. There's no text whatsoever, and it goes through this story of this little character, I think it's called Eon or something, and as he travels through space and apparently time, which I hadn't realised, and goes through all these different things, and there's also another character called Starborn. The tie-in game is actually available. The tie-in game to this game is available on Congregate, and it's really really fun, simple, cute game where you're playing as this Starborn character, and talking about what he does to affect the main story in some ways, which I always find interesting. And it, all the different pictures are very much in sequence and quite interesting, and it's very circular game because you end up back where you started. The game itself only takes a couple of hours to play, and it's also a really, really chill game, which is cool.
Yeah.
Secondly, like I said, Epistory, type in Chronicles. You play as a girl riding a fox, and you control either using the arrow keys or the letter keys, but you're typing words, and it's very much a typing story, but you've also got these little bits of text that appear in the, on the ground, and they're always quite... It's telling a story of this particular person and this wonderfully fantastical world, but there's also very much human elements in there.
Yeah.
And there's a story underneath the story, kind of. And I always found that quite interesting. Excuse me. And that was a really, that one I've played on and off for a while, and it's a beautiful story at the end. There's a lot of achievements that you can get. I haven't managed to get all of them because I don't type fast enough ever.
Yeah.
But it's worth just playing for the beauty of it. There's also the fact that all of it is in origami, and the map itself just literally folds out as you play.
Yeah.
Which I think is so cool.
Yeah. Now we come to my honorable mentions. Surprise, surprise. I must set number 1, Leisure Suit Larry.
Mm-hmm.
Might be a bit of a controversial pick. Warning, young listeners.
Yes.
Because it's a game about sex.
Okay.
You're a guy the first game is called Leisure Suit Larry in the Land of Lounge Lizards.
Mm.
And you're basically a guy on the way to try to find yourself a partner for the night.
Okay.
But it's done with an hilarious humor in it.
Okay.
As most Sierra games have a quite quirky and fun humor.
Yeah.
The game developer, the guy that has written this game, Al Lowe, which we'll come back to with my other honorable mention, is famous. He has it's not sexy, but it has a humor not of this world. It's quite dry.
Okay. Yeah.
Quite raw-grained, but...
If I remember correctly, Leisure Suit Larry also doesn't exactly look handsome, does he?
No.
Yeah.
He's an anti-hero.
Yes.
To describe him correctly. But what makes this game, I'm not so much into the whole sexy side of it.
Yeah.
But it's the humor. The humor makes the entire game in this case.
Nice.
And yeah, it's hilarious. And he was also involved in the King's Quest games.
Yes. As
he worked for Sierra for quite a while. Another game of him that I'm going to talk about now is Freddy Pharkas Frontier Pharmacist. A game by the same developer as Leisure Suit Larry, and with the same hilarious humor, just in a Wild Western setting. And
Nice.
Dark stuff are happening and you get it, basically. It's a very fun game, but a quite tricky game. So it took me several puzzles in Freddy Pharkas, took me like 10 to 20 attempts.
Okay.
Just to get the sequence right of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's an hilarious game with an hilarious humor. If you like games with humor, you should really check out the Theme Hospital and Theme Park series.
Okay.
Because they have a huge, hilarious humor. The next game I'm going to talk about is so dark that I quitted playing it.
Okay.
Alchemy Mysteries, Prague Legends.
Okay.
It's set in Prague, and what I find hard about this game is that you hear voices through the walls and stuff like that.
Okay.
And it contains quite a bit of, you are looking for a mystery from an alchemist in the 16th century.
Okay.
It's an amazing game. It's a lot about hidden objects.
That's cool.
But it's really, really creepy at times and makes you feel uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But the general quality of it, if it was a similar game available without the whispering walls, I would definitely play it. Because I love the city of Prague. I wish that someone would make a game. This is just me free-flowing fantasy, that they would make a game based on the Gollum legend.
Okay.
Which is an amazing folk legend from the Czech Republic.
Nice.
He's said to be resting in a synagogue in the Jewish quarters in Prague, so...
Okay. That's cool.
This game mainly appealed to me because it said Prague.
Yeah.
I didn't really know what I was going into, and it's a cheap game, so...
That's fair enough.
Well,
so,
number one.
My number one has always been, and probably will always be, the Dark Parable series. To give you a bit of background about the Dark Parable series, somebody at Blue Tea Games, in conjunction with Big Fish Games, came up with the concept: what if fairy tales were like alive and living in the modern world? The first game is The Mystery of Briar Rose. They've adapted the fairy tale to make it so that when the witch died and the prince came and kissed her and stuff, Snow White didn't wake up. Sleeping Beauty didn't wake up. Oh, no, it's The Curse of Briar Rose. Sorry, my mistake. That game is the first game in the series. It has that and the second game both have secret areas that unlock when you do a second playthrough. Which is quite fun, and you get hints as to the next game on that particular one. And again, it's a hidden object puzzle. However, the difference between normal hidden object puzzles and Dark Parable's hidden object puzzles is that instead of finding loads of different items, you are making one item out of different parts that you find within whatever scene it is. And that is actually a really interesting concept, because it's like you're finding this one object and then you're going to do something with it later. And that's always quite interesting. Yeah. The third game introduces the idea of the parables. basically, it takes the story that you already know. The third one is actually the story of Snow White. But the what if Snow White was actually also the Snow Queen? And how would that work out, and how would that look? And the parables are literally stories that link into the main story. You also get a bonus game at the end, which is effectively like DLC, but not, because it's not downloadable. It's already included in the game if you buy the collector's editions, which, surprisingly enough, I tend to do. The latest, they were taken over by iPix for a while after about 7 games. They then reverted back to doing Booty and iPix, which work really, really well. Again, you've also got like morphing objects in there, but there are so many titles in the series. It's really good. The latest one was, was a legend that I've never heard of called Salt Princess, which I think is a Hungarian folktale. Oh wait, no, was it that one, or was it? It's either that one or it was the Little Matchstick Girl. I think it was the Little Matchstick Girl,
which is H.C. Andersen,
which is Hans Christian Andersen. Which obviously is a fantastic game, and the story is lovely, and the idea is that the girls' matches grant, well, not exactly wishes, but they come up with illusions that make it look as if the wishes have happened. And the main one of the other things that you get in the series is you get different characters from the previous games coming back. For example, in the 4th game in the series, you get you get Briar Rose coming back as one of the Red Riding Hood sisters. In another game, you get Snow White coming back as the son of Ross Red, and I can't remember the other one, the other person involved. But the stories themselves are really well done, and they interweave really well, and tend to be quite interesting in that respect. So I always find them really, really good.
Yeah.
Anyway, your number 1, my dear.
My number 1 is a game that has made so many people rage quit.
Yep.
It's that type of game, but it's a wonderful game. The first game was the first real multimedia adventure game there was.
Yes.
We are, of course, talking about the Myst series.
I have never played Myst. Andreas actually got me to play a bit last time I was here, and that turned out to be really fun. The puzzles themselves aren't actually... The puzzles, bearing in mind I do puzzle games on a regular basis, aren't as difficult as people think they are. It's just they require a lot of concentration, I think.
It's not just that. The puzzles in Myst are often that you have to put together a lot of small bits of information.
Yep.
Nothing is really obvious.
Yes, this is true.
And in the first game, you come to an empty island. Myst are generally an environment where you will meet 2-3 people the entire game.
Yes.
Except for in the 4th game when you're meeting with the Council of Nuns. But yeah.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic game series, and why I put this as number 1 is because of its beauty. It's an art piece, and for those that have seen the Facebook post when we recorded this, will see that I have a physical copy of the second game in the series.
Yes.
And these games took ages to develop. Just the second game was like 5 years in development or such like that. And they had 40 computers of that time to render the graphics. It's early 3D, but it stands up to modern era. And to my joy and pleasure, Cyan has gone really much into crowdfunding. So for the anniversary box set, which I couldn't afford, sadly enough, you get a copy of like an iPad with the look of the books.
Nice.
And stuff like that. So they are really good, and they have also been pioneers in wanting to make the older games available on newer platforms.
Yep.
Because let's face it, they use QuickTime, which is phased out by Apple now since a number of years. So they've had to remodel quite much.
Yes.
But the remastered one are absolutely gorgeous.
Yes.
And I must also say that this series are very philosophical.
Yes.
Philosophical, quite demanding, yes, but such a beauty, such an art piece, such a full picture.
Yeah. And it's one of those series that, in my opinion, not only to a certain extent stands the test of time, but has gone down in history as being basically like the first point-and-click 3D adventure game.
Yeah, and they also worked very early with music and sound design in a time where most you would hear were bleep or ad-lib music. They used samples very early.
Yep.
And what I really like is the graphic style. It's dark at times, of course. You come to an island with a destroyed library.
Yes.
In the first game. And then it's the whole appearance of the series that appeals to me. I used to play this on an old Mac I once had from 1995, and there was a box set of CDs. That's how I got into the series.
Nice.
So it's definitely worth buying, especially as they just released game number 3 and 4 on GOG.
Nice.
And it was a GOG exclusive release.
Yeah.
So it's worth buying. Game number 3 and 4. Game number 3 also has the benefit of it being a free moving head, finally.
Yes.
The first 2 games you have fixed perspectives. But in game number 3 and 4 you have free moving head, which is absolutely adorable. Yeah.
Which is good.
How did it came that you started playing adventure games from the beginning? What makes you so fond of the genre?
I think, for me, as you've probably gathered, I've always been interested in the story. I love, different art styles. I'm very much one of the reasons that I started playing a lot of the Big Fish games that I've got, including the Dark Parables series, was because of the story. Granted, basically with the Dark Parables series, you're playing as I think, possibly female detective. The gender's never really specified, but there's hints that you're playing as a female detective rather than as a male one, and you're investigating story. You're investigating fairy tale stuff to do with fairy tales, and I've always found that to be a really good kind of starting point at least for me, because obviously I'm really big into fairy tales and myths and legends, and you get the idea. And as such, I always really enjoyed just playing them for the stories. The art style always if the art style is good, then that helps. But I've come across some really good stories just because I've kind of been browsing on Steam or gone on to gone on to Big Fish, or occasionally I look on GOG. I don't really get much on GOG though, but there's definitely there's definitely stories out there to make you think.
And I have a big bunch of adventure games that I haven't played yet because simply I'm waiting for digital remaster releases.
Of course.
For example, the Gabriel Knight, just to skip the hassle of changing discs.
Yeah.
Is quite worth it.
Yeah.
And also there is what I find interesting about adventure games is that I come originally from a side-scrolling platformer style gaming.
Okay.
Which also has a story, of course. But what I really fell for with Myst was the full sensory input experience where everything melts together.
Yes. Anyway.
And especially Riven, they recommend you of being two people sitting by the same computer.
Okay.
So these are games where it's good to have a partner.
Yes, definitely helps, I think. And it's fun if you've got somebody sitting by you and kind of looking at the puzzles with you and helping you through.
Yeah.
Anyway, I've been suggesting, and I think we should put it up to the audience. We've been thinking about maybe doing some Twitch streams of some of these games. We both have Twitch channels, so if you think that would be a really cool idea,
please give us a comment of which game you would like. I must also mention that it would be great if we could know which games you want us to play.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially when it comes to Sierra games, and these older games can be tricky to get going.
Yes.
So we might need time for experimentation with technology and stuff. But this is something we only can do when we are in the same room as well. So you will have to be patient with us regarding live streams and such.
Yes.
But one thing I've also thought of is that we should do a Q&A at some point. And we will see when that will happen. So please feel free to write us your questions on our Facebook wall.
Or on YouTube comments or anywhere
Yeah. And make sure to like our Facebook page. We're Once Upon a Storytime.
Yes, which we will link in the description.
Of course we will. We are very pleasant to be here today with you all listeners out there, wherever you are. It's always interesting to start gaming, to study games and games history, as I have done quite much.
Yep.
And I hope at some point we will be able to make it to do an interview with someone. We have some dream guests when it comes to adventure games.
Yes.
Some people that have worked at Sierra.
Yes.
So we will hope that we will be able to catch those people at some point in this podcast.
Yes.
To basically talk about how it was being in the company at that point. And yeah.
Yeah.
So up until then,
have a good day, and we will see you next time.
Where we will be talking about something completely different because we don't know.
Yes. So yeah. Anyway, we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.